I have many years of practice, and I have never seen a case as horrific as this. This case combines some of the most horrific elements of the cases involving Jimmy Savile, Jeffrey Epstein, and Harvey Weinstein. Savile, because in this case, as in that, the institution, we say, knew about the behaviour. Epstein, because in that case, as in this, there was a procurement system in place to source the women and girls, as you know, there are some very young victims of this, for abuse. And Weinstein, because it was a person at the very top of the organisation who was abusing his power. We will say it plainly, Mohamed Al Fayed was a monster. He was a monster. But he was a monster enabled by a system that pervaded Harrods. Those of you who have seen the most magnificent documentary that we saw last night will know and may well remember very clearly the words of the manager who said the following: anyone who tells you they didn't know what was going on is lying. I'm going to stress that word of his, lying. Our clients include most of the survivors who spoke out on the BBC documentary, and all the survivors we have are here today. Our aim, and our single aim, is to seek justice for the survivors of the sexual abuses of Mohamed Al Fayed, who we say was enabled by an unsafe system of work which Harrods established, maintained, certainly acquiesced to, and we say facilitated during his chairmanship. We believe that the system not only enabled, but potentially and allowed, to a knowing extent, the widespread sexual abuse of the survivors that we represent. We welcome, but we welcome as a very much a first step, the admission at the end of the programme last night, given by Harrods, that they had, to quote them, failed these women. However, they also claim, or that piece claimed, that they didn't know about Al Fayed's behaviour until 2023. We will say it plainly. That is simply not true. This was systematic abuse well before that time, and within the knowledge, we say, of Harrods well before that time. Thanks to bold journalism and the many impediments that bold journalism faced in the day, reports of Al Fayed's behaviour were made public as early as 1995. Al Fayed was accused of indecent assault against a 15-year-old girl who bravely made her claims in the documentary last night. We say beyond peradventure that those who controlled Harrods knew of Mohamed Al Fayed's inappropriate behaviour. And we say that choosing to only address the accusations now is an insult to all of the brave survivors who came forward with their stories all those years ago, and throughout and up to now. It shouldn't have come to this.
I would also like to echo what my colleague Dean has said in saying that this is one of the worst cases of corporate sexual exploitation that certainly I, and perhaps the world, has ever seen. It was absolutely horrific. And I cannot stress that word enough. It was horrific. It's horrific because the acts carried out against these young women and girls, and I say girls because most of them were only 19 to 24 at the time, and some were as young as 15 and 16. It's horrific because the system, and it was a system, that procured them was enabling the abuse of these young women. And it's horrific because the effects that this sexual abuse and of Harrods' institutional betrayal have had on our clients. These effects have lasted years and in some instances for decades, and even continue to this day. Some of the survivors even ended up in psychiatric care. Some have been able to have intimate relationships. Some continue to suffer from nightmares, depression and anxiety. This should never have happened, and Harrods must accept responsibility for the damage these women have suffered.
Once selected for their role by the special recruitment process that we've been able to identify, the women would be sent to have a private medical examination. Medical examinations would be undertaken by 3 or 4 private doctors that we have been able to identify. The women would arrive for their medical examination none the wiser, expecting this to be an examination to perhaps check their weight, their blood pressure, or their height. They would then be told that actually the examination would involve a full internal screening, including a full cervical smear, sometimes having their ovaries checked, and a full sexual health screening. This was for their role that they had been offered as secretary, personal assistant, or even, on occasions, interior designer. If the women would query why the tests were necessary, they would be told something along the lines of, "He wants to make sure that you are clean." The results were really provided to them personally, but Mohamed Al Fayed and his enablers would know those results. Because if there was ever anything untoward about those results, he would make degrading and humiliating comments to the women personally about what he had been told about their medical examination. As we know, the grooming, sexual assaults and threatening behaviour were varied and plentiful, but they all followed a similar pattern of events that we have been able to identify. Ladies were frequently followed, and we have witness evidence that we have obtained from members of the security team who had the job of keeping an eye on those ladies, to check what they were doing, to even check if they were in relationships. One woman we know was 16 or 17, and she was sent to be followed by a member of the security team to check if she was in a relationship. That member of the security team would have to report back to Mohamed Al Fayed on what he heard. If they ever attempted to complain about the sexual assaults, we know from our work that we've undertaken that they would receive threats along the lines of, "You'll never work in London again. I know where you and your family live." Often, they would be demoted, and false allegations would be made about them, so that they had no choice at all but to leave Harrods.